She arrived at the ranch just before dusk, when the sky was bruised purple and gold, and the air carried the dry scent of hay and dust. Her hands were numb from gripping the strap of her bag the entire ride. As if letting go might make her disappear, everyone in town had whispered the same thing. The rancher paid his debts cleanly. No delays, no mercy. One night, one deal, freedom by morning. She repeated that promise to herself as she stepped onto the land, trying to ignore the tightness in her chest. He appeared from the barn without hurry, tall, broad-shouldered, his hat casting a shadow that hid his eyes. He didn't smile. He didn't leer. That unsettled her more than anything else. Men who wanted to own you usually made it obvious. This one simply looked at her as if measuring the weather. When he spoke, his voice was calm, almost distant. He named the amount he would pay, the debt he would erase, the rule that it was only for the night, no questions after. She nodded because she had learned that hesitation was expensive. He showed her the guest house instead of the main home, set apart from the barn and fences, neat and quiet. A lamp glowed on the table, clean sheets waited on the bed, and a pitcher of water stood by the window. It felt wrong, too gentle for what she had agreed to. He told her to rest and left without another word. Alone, she sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the wind scrape the walls, telling herself not to imagine meaning where there was none. When night settled fully, he returned. There were no dramatic words, no claiming touches meant to remind her of the bargain. He was careful, restrained, as if crossing a line he didn't want to see. She felt the strange ache of being treated like a secret rather than a possession. She kept her thoughts locked away, focused on counting breaths, on the promise of morning. Whatever passed between them, she told herself, would be over by dawn. Afterward, he didn't linger. He stood by the door, said simply that the debt was cleared, and left her with the quiet. Sleep came in fragments. When she woke, pale light was creeping across the floor, and the ranch lay hushed beyond the window. She dressed quickly, ready to leave before regret could take shape. He was on the porch when she stepped outside, holding a cup of coffee, looking out over the fields as if the land demanded his attention more than she did. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he said she could stay a few days if she needed to decide where to go next. No pressure, no expectation. The offer caught her off guard, cracked something open she hadn't meant to feel. She should have refused. She knew that. But the road beyond the gate felt heavier than the silence beside him. And so, with the sun rising and the deal already paid, she stayed, believing the night was finished, unaware that it had only begun. The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm she hadn't expected. Morning light spilled over the fences, and the ranch breathed slowly like a living thing at rest. She helped where she could, washed dishes in the small kitchen, swept the porch, walked along the fence lines just to feel movement again. Caleb was always nearby, but never too close, as if an invisible line still stood between them. He spoke little, yet his presence lingered, steady and watchful. She caught herself waiting for his footsteps, hating herself for it. At night, the guest house felt warmer, less like a temporary shelter and more like a place that remembered her. She told herself she was only staying because she needed time, because the world beyond the gate was still sharp and unforgiving. But in the quiet moments, she replayed that night in her mind, not the details, but the restraint, the sadness in his eyes when he turned away. It confused her. Men who bought nights usually wanted to feel powerful. Caleb had looked like a man trying not to break. On the fourth afternoon, she wandered farther than usual, following a narrow path shaded by tall, old trees. She noticed the house before she heard the voice. It was different from the ranch house. Soft curtains in the windows, flowers planted with care, a sense of being lived in. Then laughter drifted out, light and familiar, and her steps slowed. A woman stood in the doorway, her hair loosely tied back, her hands dusted with flour as if she'd stepped away from baking. The sound of that laugh cut through her like cold air. Understanding came all at once, brutal and clean. A wife, not a memory, not a past, a living presence. She stood frozen until the woman went back inside. The path back felt longer, heavier, but she didn't turn around. By the time Caleb found her near the guest house, her hands were shaking. He saw it immediately. The question in his eyes was answer enough. "You should have told me," she said, her voice flat, emptied of surprise. "I never said I was alone," he replied quietly. The words burned. He was right, and that somehow made it worse. She realized then how easily she had filled the silence with her own hope. The kindness, the space, the offer to stay, It had all felt like something chosen. Now it felt like something hidden. That evening, she packed her bag with sharp, angry movements. Every fold of fabric felt like reclaiming something that had slipped from her. Caleb didn't try to stop her. He stood at the door, his face drawn, as if he'd known this moment would come the second she arrived. "I didn't mean to trap you," he said. "But you did," she answered without raising her voice. When night fell, the ranch no longer felt peaceful. It felt borrowed. And this time she knew she would leave before morning, no matter how heavy the road felt. She didn't sleep that night. The guest house felt smaller now, the walls closing in as if they too knew the truth. Her bag sat by the door, packed and ready, yet something kept her rooted to the bed, staring at the thin line of moonlight on the floor. Anger pulsed beneath her ribs. But beneath that was a quieter ache she didn't want to name. She had come here believing she was selling a night. Instead, she'd stepped into a life already divided, already breaking. Just before dawn, footsteps approached. She stiffened, expecting another apology, another explanation she didn't want. When the knock came, it was soft, hesitant. Caleb stood outside, hat in his hands, his shoulders heavy with a weariness that went deeper than regret. He didn't ask her to stay. That surprised her more than anything else. "My marriage has been over for years," he said, staring past her at the pale horizon. "But ending it costs more than money. It costs truth. And I've been avoiding that." She listened without interrupting, arms folded tightly, guarding herself. For the first time she saw him clearly, not as a man with land and power, but as someone trapped by his own silence. She understood it too well. She had lived under other people's choices long, enough to recognize the weight of them. "I thought I owned that night," she said finally. "Like you'd bought something from me." Caleb shook his head. "No, I thought I could borrow being someone else." Just for a moment. The honesty didn't soften the damage, but it changed its shape. She realized then that neither of them had been free. She'd arrived desperate, believing money decided her worth. He'd paid, believing control could quiet his guilt. In that exchange, they had both lost something they couldn't name. When the sun rose, she walked toward the gate without looking back. The land glowed gold, beautiful and indifferent. At the fence, she paused only long enough to breathe in the open air, to feel the choice settle into her bones. This time, leaving wasn't running. It was claiming herself. Weeks passed. She found work in a town where no one knew her story, where mornings felt earned and nights belonged to her alone. One evening, a letter waited at her door. No return address. Inside was a check, enough to remind her of the ranch, and a single line written in careful ink. "You were never owned. I just wish I had learned sooner that I was." She folded the paper slowly. The words didn't pull her back. They closed something she hadn't realized was still open. She didn't need forgiveness or explanation. What she needed, she already had. A life moving forward, built on her own terms. She stepped outside, the sky wide and unclaimed above her. For the first time, the memory of that night no longer felt like a shadow. It felt like a turning point. And as she walked on, she knew with certainty that no one would ever own her night again.